Hello, everyone, and welcome back down here to the Gamer's Den with me, your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. Uh, Wonderfully, bountifully bearded now, and with a magnificent horned helm, I must make an imposing visage here on the camera. Sadly, I am not going to do the whole episode wearing this thing. It gets uncomfortable after a while, in spite of how fun it is. Fantastic in winter, though. Definitely helped to keep me warm many, many days walking into work. But today I wanted to talk to you about a subject that I think eventually comes up for most DMs and storytellers and players, even too. And that's the subject of homebrewing. Homebrewing, coming up with your own rules, setting, ideas, abilities, items, spells, all different sorts of things. And it's something that it's important, honestly. It's something that's going to come up eventually because, as much fun as having pre made, prepared materials is, it can get a little bit repetitive and samey, if you can believe it. Coming up with your own original worlds, settings, factions, all of these things that I've already listed here at the start of this is massively important. It helps to differentiate, ingratiate, and engage your players in new and different ways. It gives them something different and unexpected. Now, it can also just absolutely break your game beyond any sort of repair. You basically have to scrap everything and just start over. Or, if you do it progressively in small amounts, work with your players on fine tuning things and just say, hey, I know we came up with this spell and it does this amount of damage, but I think we need to walk that back just a little bit. But in return, we'll increase the save DC or do something to exchange. Walk back how outright powerful a particular spell might be, and then just change it for the number of targets it can affect, or something to kind of trade it out. Unless you've just absolutely created something god awful powerful, and you just need to nerf it a little bit, which happens. It's one of the reasons why I ask my players to run by any custom things they find online by me first, particularly when it comes to classes or archetypes for a class that they're interested in playing. And that's because I just want to see how they roughly compare to the standard baseline stuff that's already provided. So the base classes out of 5th edition or Pathfinder or whatever game we might be running. I'd like for them to run it by me first. Or if they're coming up with something, I'd like to work with them on it. Particularly if I'm running one of my own homebrew campaigns, I want to try to incorporate it so that way it fits properly within my world, if at all possible. And more or less, it's been fairly successful with most of my players, whether it's something they found or come up with. Uh, all the way around, I'm very pleased with it, but it's something that all of you should be prepared to do, DMs and players alike. 5th edition in particular, it absolutely screams for homebrewing, at least from what I look at. In particular, paladins. The paladin oaths are a fantastic feature. I think it's a great way of helping to differentiate and diversify paladins pretty readily. But it's also very broadly generic in a way that's meant to be applicable to a wide number of different settings and worlds, not just Faerun. But because things are set in Faerun, or you could set things in Eberron, or the any number of other settings, Greyhawk, gosh, on and on and on. These different settings and different worlds, they have different deities. And while yes, the oath of the different oaths that the paladins can take up, those are all the ones that are brought in are all definitely very much so applicable and usable, but it's also very generic, and you want to fine tune things a little bit more, like having a paladin of Tyr differentiating a paladin of Tyr from a paladin of Selûne, or any of the other number of Faerunian deities. You want them to be differentiated from one another because the deities themselves embody different things. And Selûne is one of the oldest goddesses. I believe her and her sister Shar are the two oldest, aside from the god Ao that spawned both of them, if I'm remembering correctly. And Selûne is, goddess of the moon, the stars. She has magic in her portfolio, knowledge, all of these different things. And compared to a Tyr, the god Tyr, he's or even Helm, Tyr, Helm, these different gods, gods of defense, protection, justice. Their paladins are going to embody very different things from Selûne's paladins, and so you should try to fine tune some of these paladin oaths to the different deities. In fact, probably just come up with different deity specific oaths yourselves and on your own. And I've done actually something like that for a player of mine, for a group that meets all too infrequently, even with an online aspect going. But still, I've created a custom paladin oath to fit her character for Selûne in this campaign in Faerun that we have going. And so it feels that much more personalized. It feels tied into the character a bit more, because she was just going with one of the more standard generic oaths, which wasn't bad. It was very classic paladin kind of stuff and definitely fit what she was going for. But by presenting her something that was just a little bit more fine-tuned, tweaked, and meant for Selûne, she glommed onto it. Was like, yes, I love everything about this. This is great. And it fit, and she adopted it, absorbed it, gave me her feedback on it as well, and I fine-tuned, tweaked, and adjusted further from there, working with my player on something that was homebrewed, that felt more endemic and fitting within the Faerun setting. Doing this for your games is something that you should absolutely embrace doing once you're comfortable. Once you're comfortable and are familiar with the rules, with the basics, or just familiar with how a game runs. And then once you're comfortable with it and familiar with it, you can start to see where you can kind of tweak and adjust things a bit more readily. And D20 Modern's an example that I'm running with here pretty thoroughly and readily on this channel. I mean, I've got all kinds of ideas and an understanding of D20 Modern that I think allows me to tweak and adjust things and fix things in such a way that balances the game a little bit more and makes it I believe, definitely makes it more fun. But, that's also going to be subject from table to table, player to player, and all of that. So, not homebrewing is not one size fits all. Homebrewing is definitely something that more is for your style and for your players, and sometimes specifically the things that you are going for. I mean, for me, I know a number of my own house rules are just based off of my knowledge of history and martial arts, and historical European martial arts and Japanese martial arts, all of these different systems and methods of combat that I've either gotten to practice or have studied or read about and can apply, what level of knowledge I do have towards those things, like half sorting, for example. For those of you who don't know what half sorting is, it's basically where you're using something like a long sword. You grip about halfway up the blade and start using it like a spear, wheeling it about. And you typically do that when you're going up against an armored opponent, typically in plate mail. And you're aiming to use your sword to go for the gaps in the armor. So under the arm here at the armpit, around the neck, backs of the knees, things like that. You're working towards the gaps there. And the reason you do that is because, well, there's less armor. You're mainly looking at going through mail and whatever cloth coverings underneath to prevent chafing. And most longswords around the time when plate mail became a regular thing to deal with, they start to taper down to a very fine point at the end, one that's able to go through the rings in uh, mail armor, and maybe not with a great depth of penetration, but about a solid 2 inches slipping through and stabbing into the flesh. Even if it's not a lethal injury, it's still an injury that the opponent is bleeding from, and that's going to weaken them wherever you hit. And if you hit around the neck or at the face, well, the chances of lethality really goes up there. And I am starting to ramble on too much about medieval combat, but point being, I made half sorting a rule for my game, and also not just half sorting, but using a long sword like a club, where you're gripping by the blade and swinging the handle and the hilt and everything at your opponent. Again, something you do against your more armored opponents, because a bludgeoning weapon is much more effective against mail than something that's designed for cut and thrust. So, clubbing your opponent, especially if you club them in the head on the helmet, is definitely going to get their bell ringing pretty good. Kind of literally in that case, delivering a concussion is a fantastic way of incapacitating an opponent. And that armor will probably keep them alive, but they're definitely going to regret being conscious through all of that, and gives you an opportunity. But again, I'm rambling too much about this subject. Point being, that's something that I house ruled doing some homebrew, and put those rules into my games, so that way players can have an accurate, realistic way of dealing with an opponent. Just because you have a magic sword made out of exotic fantasy materials doesn't mean you immediately discard good swordsmanship. No, you just incorporate that all together there. Magic sword's a magic sword, and that's going to be fantastic, but still, beating somebody over the head with the handle is still going to do some damage, and the fact that it's a magic sword to boot is probably only going to just make that even better. Or at least I argue that it would. But again, homebrewing. Homebrewing will allow you to add so much more. I mean, it's why I love running custom worlds and the like. But homebrewing, tweaking, and adjusting things will help you to get a game to suit your play style, to suit what you're going for, specifically for your players, for the story, for your own fun and amusement, and for the players' fun and amusement as well. And that's, again, the overall goal. The only way to really do homebrewing wrong is if you're not having fun. Technically, from the mathematics side, for those of you who are very rules focused and obsessed, you don't want to homebrew to the point that you completely break everything, but add in that bit of flavor, your own personal flair, and your touch to things. Absolutely embrace this and go for it. There's very little stopping you. You go wild with your imagination and have fun. Figure out where you need to scale back and where you can push a little bit more. And certainly it's been a lot of fun for me, especially once I really learned how to use the rules to my advantage. Understand it allows you to understand better where you can bend them, where you can break them, or replace them. But certainly, I'm certainly not the only person to homebrew things. I mean, every tabletop gaming book worth its salt will tell you, if there's a rule that doesn't work, ignore it, add in your own substitute things. It's rule zero, have fun, and homebrewing is definitely highly encouraged with any game that's I shouldn't say any game that's worthwhile, but you get what I'm saying at this point. With that said, we're going to go ahead and call it there before I keep rambling and wandering on down too many other rabbit holes, and oh my goodness, baby boy. Well, I'll have to go get that taken care of as well. With that said, I've been your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. If you enjoyed today's video, go on down there in the comments and let me know. Or hell, even if you didn't like it, still let me know about it. Give me an earful, or in this case, an eyeful. Let me know what you thought. Let me go over everything. Give me feedback. Let me know what brewing you've done on your own and what house rules you like to run with. Certainly, I'd be more than happy to engage and share plenty more of my own, and maybe I'll do that as a follow-up to this, go over that specific paladin oath that I started playing around with. And also, if you're looking for more content from the Gamer's Den, well, good news. There's going to be 2 videos popping up over here. The first is one that Google has decided that you will enjoy. The other is another one that I've done recently here that I think you're going to find to be fantastic. Or hell, if this hasn't been your first stop here at the Gamer's Den, then go on down there, hit the subscribe button. You're clearly enjoying something. Why not be a regular member and get notified the next time I upload more content here to the channel? But once again, with that said, I've been your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. Thank you all so very much for your time, and you all have yourselves a good night.